So we learned about the app manifest properties. Let's now add them to our manifest.json file so that we can actually see it in action. I will start with the name, and since this is a JSON file, every property has to go between double quotation marks. So double quotation marks name is the first property I want to configure here. The value also goes between double quotation marks. I will name it Instagram as progressive web app, since we kind of built an Instagram clone here, a very simple version of it. Now that's a rather long name, so let's also add the short underscore name property, where I will simply name this PWAgram. So basically the short version, which will be displayed below the app icon, for example. Speaking of that, before I configure anything else about this application, I want to add an icon so that we can see something. So let's add the icons property also between double quotation marks. And next, let's set the value, which is an array, not between double quotation marks. Here we specify multiple objects with curly braces, also not between double quotation marks, which configure the various icons we use. Each icon consists of 3 properties at least. The first property is the source, so basically pointing to the path where to find this icon. Now if you expand source here, under images, you'll find the icons folder, which holds, well, a lot of icons actually. Now I'll come back to what these Apple icons here do. The app icons are the ones I want to use for now. So let's start with the smallest one, the 48 by 48 icon. So the source simply is / to refer to our root folder, which is public since that is where our app is served from. Then source, so now we're inside this folder here. Next we want to go into images, so let's add images here. And let's add icons thereafter to access the icons folder. And then let's simply pick the icon we want to refer to, in this case app-icon-48x48.png. So this icon here. That's the path to the icon. We also need to give the browser a little bit more information. For example, the type. The type here is image/png. Now this is the type we want to use. We also need to give it information about the size, because whilst it is encoded in the file name, we could give this icon any file name. So that isn't enough for the browser. Instead, let's add a sizes property here, and let's be very clear about the size. The size is always identified as a x by x ratio, so 48 by 48 in this case. So always the width times the height. So this is the information we need to give it about the first icon. Now, of course, there are more icons. So let's add the next icon, 96 by 96. I simply have to change the names here, and the same should be true for you since you downloaded my project, so you already have all these icons. And we will do this all the way up to this app icon 512 to 512. So I will quickly do this and exchange the number every time I add a new icon here. So the next one for me is 144. And feel free to skip ahead to the end of this part here, because it might not be that interesting seeing me add all these icons. Still want to give you a chance to follow along smoothly though. So we're approaching the end here. We're at the 256 icon already. Now let's add 2 more. The next one is the 348 by 348 icon here. 84, excuse me, 384. And finally, the last icon I want to add is the 512 by 512 icon for very big devices. These are all the icons added, and with that the browser should be able to load our app correctly. Now with that added, let's go after this squared brackets, so after the icons array, and let's start adding more properties. Because besides the icon, we also can specify a start URL. Remember, that is the property which defines which page should be loaded when we launch our app from this home screen icon. Here I want to load /index.html, referring to the index.html file in our main directory. Besides that, I also want to set up a scope, so which pages should be part of the progressive web app. And here I will specify a dot, which basically means all the files in the public folder are part of my progressive web app. Next, I'll add display. And display for me here is standalone. However, there are other options too. You could also specify full screen, which basically means that it will cover up the whole screen, and whilst standalone still would have a toolbar and basically behave like a standalone app, full screen is like the full screen native apps, you know, where you don't see any controls at all. Not typically the choice you take for web applications, but you could do that. You can also choose minimal UI. This will also feel like a standalone application, but with a reduced amount of UI elements. And you can also choose browser, which will open it like a normal web page in the browser. Now that's not very native application-like, so I will use standalone, which is the common choice you take here. We can next also set the orientation of our application. Now orientation can be any, or portrait, or landscape. Now, any obviously allows the user to switch, whilst portrait and landscape limited to a certain orientation. If you specify portrait primary, you also make sure that it doesn't switch if the user rotates the device by 180 degrees, which still is portrait, but obviously, well, upside down. Well, not on your web app, but the device. So portrait primary makes sure that it only is portrait if the basically home button is at the bottom of the device. And again, any and landscape are the alternatives. Now I will set it to portrait primary for this app here. However, be aware that in other apps you might not want to limit this. Maybe you want to give the user the freedom to rotate it. So definitely set this with care. Again, I will go with portrait primary here, but depending on the app you're building, you might want to set this to landscape or to any maybe. Now that's it for the orientation. We also can change the colors. I did mention this in the previous video. For example, we have the background color here. The background color allows us to define the color which is used in the background whilst our page is building up, or on the splash screen, so this loading screen, whilst the whole application is still loading. Here I will choose hashtag FFF, which is the hex code for white color, because I want to have a white splash screen with only our icon being placed in the middle of it. The browser will do this automatically for us. You will see it in one of the next lectures. You can also set up a theme color here. The theme color defines the overall theme, for example, used in the toolbar or in the task switcher. And here I picked a nice color, which is basically the color used by the CSS package I used for styling the application. It's 3F51B5. That's this nice purple look you can see on our running web application. This look here, so the color of this toolbar. With the colors set up, you can also add a description. And again, this is a text which will be used by the browser whenever it needs to present a description to the user. So here, a simple Instagram clone implementing a lot of PWA love. Seems like a good description for the application we're building here. Now to conclude this, there are two other properties you'll learn about. Dir to set the direction, could be right to left. Now typically it is probably left to right though, which is the default, but here, whoops, LTR then, but here you could specify a different direction to let the browser know about this. And we also have lang. I will set it to ENUS, but you can use any 4-character color code, or 5 characters actually with the dash, to specify what the default language of your application is. And that's our own manifest.json file. Now let's see how we can test it and where this actually will work in the next lecture.